It's a hard reality many of us will need to face at some point. Watching our parents get older and less able to do some of the basic tasks like perhaps driving or keeping up with the housework or maybe walking or even just taking care of themselves. If you're wondering, how do you talk about issues like this or like estate planning or end-of-life care, then this video is for you. And if you stay to the end, I'll share with you a story about why it's really important to address these issues sooner rather than later. And I'll also share one very common mistake that you should avoid if you want to be successful in these conversations. So let's face it, no one, at least no one I know, wants to have a conversation with a parent about whether they should keep driving or whether it's time to think about assisted living or whether they have an estate plan. And yet, for many of us, as we see our parents get older, we start to think, I don't really feel good about them living by themselves. Or I go in the house and I'm like, wow, things are really falling apart here. And so I want to say that for most of us, we have a lot of ambivalence about whether we should even have this conversation with our parents. And the first important step to being successful in initiating and having one of these conversations is actually acknowledge your own ambivalence about it. Why? This is actually both A, true, and B, a really great way to open the conversation with a parent. So that is, instead of coming in as if you're the expert or you've come to some obvious conclusion and now telling your parent what to do, starting by saying, there's a side of me that is really reluctant and worried and scared about having this conversation with you. And there's a side of me that knows it's really important to do, is a great opening to a hard conversation about planning for later stages in life or shifting or transition. It's successful because one, it acknowledges the conflictedness, and two, it's a signal to the parent that for both you and the parent, this is going to be hard and also navigating new and different waters. Second, and this is a theme that really cuts across a lot of the work that I do, but go into that conversation prepared to do a lot more listening than speaking. So yeah, of course, the reason why you're having the conversation is you have some things you want to share, some observations, some suggestions, some ideas. But it's also really important to really listen to what is the experience of your parents, what's important to them, what their reactions are. Third, and this is something you could really do in preparation, and it's what I call managing a role reversal. So in other words, really thinking about, maybe you need to think about yourself 20 or 30 years down the road and being the recipient of a conversation like this from one of your children or a family member or a friend. So really thinking about what it would be like to have one of your children tell you that it's time that they think about stopping some very central life activity or letting someone else take care of them or planning for the end of their life. And of course, we all resist this, right? Because we want to believe that many years down the road or it'll never happen to us. But I would say as a preparation tool, managing this role reversal, putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, your parent, and imagining what would it be like to have to make this transition. One of the things that we know from a negotiation and persuasion perspective is that we all have this psychological bias called loss aversion. So that is to say that it is harder to give up something that we already have than it is, for example, to think about acquiring something new. And when you're suggesting to a parent that they maybe think about having a live-in caretaker or move to assisted living, or rely on public transportation instead of driving themselves. Even though in your mind, that's all like, we have a solution, we have a solution, we have a solution, they're going to be focused on what they're losing. They're going to hear it as, I'm losing autonomy, or I'm losing the home I lived in for 40 years. And so the more you can put yourself in that position, be aware of the psychological bias, I think it's going to increase the likelihood that you'll be able to frame some of the issues in a better way. Fourth point is really important. Chances are you have been thinking about having this conversation with your parent for some time. But at the time you actually have the conversation, it's the first time it's been brought up to them. And so what that means is you need to create a long timeline. Don't just imagine that I will plan out a skillful conversation at the end of which they will say, you're right, I'm giving up my driver's license, or you're right, I'll move forthwith into assisted living. Instead, consider that first conversation as an opportunity to share your observations and to invite some joint brainstorming and problem solving, and then work with them to establish a timeline where you could have some further conversations and plan. If you want them to immediately get to yes at the end of that first conversation, I think it will be seen and will end up as a bit of a disappointment. Okay, so let me share with you a common mistake that sounds like a good strategy, but usually blows up. And that is in a family where, let's say everyone agrees that dad can be pretty stubborn. All of the siblings get together and they hatch a strategy where at various different times, they're all going to bring up the idea of, I don't know, let's say getting somebody else to maintain the garden and lawn. And from each individual sibling's perspective, they're like, I'm so glad we're all working in sync. And once dad hears it from everybody, that's going to be really persuasive. Problem is that ends up being perceived as ganging up on the parent. And more often than not, it leads to increased defensiveness, a sense of all of my children are being disloyal and they have it out for me. So you really want to avoid a strategy where a parent will feel ganged up on by all of their kids. I want to share with you just an example of why it's so important to think about these issues sooner rather than later. I get why we want to avoid them. They're so hard, they're so unpleasant. But I'm going to share with you a story involving some friends of mine. For a number of years, these friends, who are all siblings, were realizing that both of their parents were getting older and they probably should have some conversations about end-of-life preferences and decision-making. But turns out it never happened. And it turns out, unfortunately, dad ends up getting a very, very fast progressing form of very aggressive cancer. And ultimately, he ends up on life support in a hospital. No one has ever had a conversation with him about what his own preferences were with respect to life support. And it's very clear that he isn't going to recover and is actually suffering a lot. And unfortunately, at this point, none of the family members really knew what dad wanted, and they couldn't align on what to do. And to my own great sadness observing this, dad lingered for many, many weeks in a fair amount of pain, managing what was a very obvious end with life support assistance, while the family just sat there with inertia. And in situations like that, right, they can't always be avoided, but having these kinds of conversations sooner rather than later can make the difference. So, just to recap, first, embrace the ambivalence that you have. Acknowledge that this is both a hard conversation and an important one, and that that's how you should open the conversation. Second, always favor listening over asserting your own viewpoint. Third, spend time thinking about what it would be like to be on the receiving end of a conversation like this, so manage role reversal. And fourth, don't think this is going to be a one and done conversation. Create a timeline and an opportunity to have a number of conversations about this issue over time. So, if you want some more skills that can really help you prepare for a conversation like this, keep on watching the next video, which is how to mediate a conflict between two employees. I'm Bob Bordone. Thanks for watching. Let's keep negotiating together. And please do me a big favor, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and like this video. Okay, you want to know how to mediate? Keep on watching.